Thanks for joining the Orchid webinar. My name is Natalie and today we will present tips for Report Runner in Sage 300, both Crystal reports and financial reports. We'll start with a refresher on when to use Report Runner and resources available to get started. We'll discuss new features, mainly emailing using Microsoft Graph, and then we will go through some tips and setup examples to refresh reports and email reports for different divisions, use Process Scheduler Level 3 to refresh Financial Report Runner, and also go through some common support questions. In the second part, we will go through some Crystal Report Runner tips, looking at some setup examples, how to configure security, how to use date parameters, how to configure data part reports, how to refresh reports with Process Scheduler Level 1, and some common support questions for Crystal Reports Report Runner. Do you need Report Runner? Do you spend a lot of time running reports in the Sage 300 GL financial reports, exporting, refreshing the data, saving the files in different folders for your different divisions, departments, provinces, regions, renaming the files, and emailing it to different team members? Do these team members not have access to the reports they need when they need it? If that is one of your issues, you can then use Report Runner to create menu of your reports, your GL financial reports. You can group them as required by function, department, user groups. You can save the parameters and the naming conventions and the export file formats to run the reports more easily with just one click. And then all your reports are placed in central repositories. Report Runner lets you manage the running, distribution, and organization of reports. Report Runner is often used in conjunction with Process Scheduler to automate the scheduled execution of reports and data views to simplify and speed up reports that use optional fields. You can use Process Scheduler Level 1 to refresh and email automatically Crystal reports, and Level 3 to refresh and email automatically financial reports. And data views works well if using optional fields in custom Crystal reports. If you are new to Report Runner, a reminder that you can find a quick start video on the Orchid website. And the online help includes many of the tips and setup tutorials we're going to look at today. New features in Report Runner. In October 2022, we enabled the ability to email using Microsoft Graph. This is relevant for sites using Office 365 where basic authentication is not enabled. It applies to both Financial Report Runner and analytical reports using Crystal Reports. It is available in versions Sage 300, versions 2020 and above in the latest product updates, and is consistent with how Sage Company Profile works. It also applies to emailing using Process Scheduler. You can also use app password if multi-factor authentication is enabled for a user, but this still requires basic authentication to be enabled in your Office 365 settings. And details on how to set that up is available in the online help for Report Runner and all other Orchid modules that email. So we won't look at that in detail today. Let's focus on tips for Financial Report Runner. Financial Report Runner lets you automate GL financial reports, and all the features of the GL financial reports are available. We will look at how to add reports by department and divisions based on the chart of account and run them one by one. We'll then look at how we can refresh, rename, and email group of reports. How do we select a fiscal year and a period when we run a group of financial reports? Can we save reports in SharePoint? Can we run a financial report spec with multiple specs in the same workbook? And then we will look at how to refresh and email automatically with Process Scheduler Level 3 and look at the differences in what you can configure when you use Process Scheduler. And then we'll touch on a few common support questions that apply to Financial Report Runner. I've now activated Information Manager Report Runner in my sample data, and I want to start adding new reports to Financial Report Runner. So I go to the Analytical Reports menu, Financial Report Runner. And as you can see, I have two main sections here, including one that is always there called My Saved Runs. Under my Department 100, I have already added a few financial reports there. So let's look at one of the ones we've added, our Department 100 balance sheet. So this is the description, and remember this description as we will use it in the name that we can save our report as. This is the source file where our GL financial reports are saved. Now you can run them from anywhere. So if I browse, I can go to the folder where Sage 300 is installed and go into the GL70 ENG folder and find any balance sheet reports, any financial report specs that I have in here. While it is possible and it works, it is not necessarily best practice, as it means when you have an upgrade or if you move to a server where GL70A doesn't exist anymore, you will have to update all your different reports. So we would suggest you use a customization directory and put your GL financial reports in there. You have all the options that are available in the GL financial report. So I won't go through all of them, but specifically around the report as separate or consolidated. Generally, when you run it in Report Runner, you would choose consolidated so that when you print them, you can save each report with a name that is meaningful to the parameters that you use when you run it. So if you want to separate by division, you would still choose consolidated, but then you sort by segment and choose. In this case, we have 3 segments: division, region, and entity. I'm going to run it for division 100 to 100. And everything else I'm going to leave blank, but you could also filter by different account group. So again, these are all features of the GL financial reports that encourage you to look at the Sage documentation for details on that. So once I've added my report, I can select it and I click Select and Print. I have already pre-configured where I'm going to save the report in the print destination. So it's going to be in Excel format, and it's going to go into this folder called Orchid Ltd Reports FR National. And then I have all these variables that I can use in naming my file. Name is the report name, but it is basically the description that we have entered when we have added the file to Financial Report Runner. So in this case, it's going to be Department 100-balance sheet. If I want the source file name, so the Excel file behind it, without a path or without an extension, I use the variable called file name. And you can mix and match, so your saved output could be called name-file name. So in this case, it will be Department 100-balance sheet-bal sum 01. And then after that, I'm adding the year, date, and month that I'm saving the report as. Use Browse to find the path where I want to save my saved report. Optionally, I can click Send an email, select a message ID. So I've got one here for financial reports, and put in an email address. You can add multiple email addresses separated by semicolon. I can save this configuration. And if I want to save a variation of this one, maybe without emailing, I can choose Save As and then change it and remove the ability to email. So I can quickly copy some configuration into others. Now that I've set up how I want to print my report and rename it and who I'm going to email it, I can choose Print. So while I'm doing that, Financial Report Runner is going to open Excel, refresh the report as if you were going FR View in the GL Financial Report. So now my reports have been saved and I have sent one email. So let's look at this folder, Orc Reports, FR Nationals. I can see my email here has come through. And I can see here I've got a report called Debt 100 Balance Sheet dated today. And if I open it, I'll have my FR View report. So how can we refresh a report with multiple FR specs? In this example, I've created a new group called All Division, and I have included one report, which happens to have a balance sheet on one sheet and an income statement on the other sheet. And I'm running this for all divisions. So when I click Print, the financial report will refresh Sheet 1, refresh Sheet 2, do FR View on both sheets, and then consolidate it into one file going into this folder, and we'll also attach it to the email. So let's do that now. So it's now doing FR View of the balance sheet. It is doing now FR View of the income statement sheet, consolidating both sheets into one file, saving it into the folder, and sending one email. So let's look at our email attached here. I've got one file. If I open it, I've got my balance sheet refreshed and my income statement refreshed as well. And now I can see the report has been saved here, and it is the same one. If I want to run multiple reports in one go, I can select them all in here. So one whole group from Department 100. I can add all the reports from Department 200 as well. Click Select Print. And here I have the option to select the fiscal year and period. So when I run the reports in the Financial Report Runner interface, every time I run, I have the option of selecting the fiscal year and period that I want to run it for. So we might change to period 12 of 2022. And here I'm going to choose where to save my report. So I'm going to go into this folder and let's put it into the divisional report. I've just given it a name here from the browse, but then I can adjust that name based on the options that I have here. So I'm just going to do name to get the description for all the reports that I have here. And I'm going to put the year and the month. 4 Ys and the month is 2 Ms. I'm going to have just 01, 02, 03, but I could put the full month if I wanted. I also have on this report order the ability to change the order in which the reports are run. So I might want to have this one up because it relates to Department 100. And in many cases, I do this once, but I'm actually going to run this every month. So I'm going to save this particular configuration. So this is how I'm saving the configuration where I'm going to print and whether I'm going to email and who I'm going to email it to for a group of reports. So if I'm selecting a group, they all have to go to the same folder, but obviously the naming will be different. This is Department 100, 200, print only. Save this. And now let's run it. It's now run the 7 reports. Now, for the purpose of the video, I have cut out the time that it's actually taking to open Excel, refresh, and so we can see it's done it by looking at our folder. I have saved those reports. Department 200 income statement, Department 200 financial ratio, Department 200 balance sheet, and Department 100 balance sheet and income statement, financial ratio, and balance sheet. And these are reports that I had done previously. Now, if I close this and next month I come back in here, I can go into my saved runs and select this one again, all departments, print only. Go select, print, and how can I select a fiscal year and period? I just updated to, let's say I now want to do 2023 period 2. It's still going to go to that same folder with different names, and I can save that if I want, or save as, or just go print, and it's now going to run the report for next month. And if I want to see what's in that report, let's go back here. We see that in our report order, these are the 7 reports that are going to be included. So we've seen how we can save and refresh and how we can rename one report or a group of reports. Either on the fly or using my saved run, I can run that again 1 month after the next by selecting the fiscal year and period. Next question is, how can I send an email through Financial Report Runner? So as we've mentioned in IM Setup options, on the email tab, we configure how we're going to email using either SMTP, and various examples of how to configure SMTP are available on the online help for Report Runner. And I also have the option of using Microsoft Graph. And that applies to using Office 365 when basic authentication is disabled. So I've configured that, I've clicked send test emails, and it's all working. Then I go to IM Analytical Reports, choose Financial Report Runner, and as we've looked at here, I can do it either for one report, emailing here, or in my saved run, just unselect this one, my saved run, which is department 100, 200 with email. It's also going to that same email address. So for the sake of time, I have run this in the background. And if we now look at our email for test user, I've received one email with one attachment, one at a time. And the other one where I had 7 files attached, all my files are here, named what I asked them to be named. Department 100 income statement, Department 200 balance sheet, etc. Subsidiary question to this is, can I save this report in SharePoint? What we have done in this example to configure using SharePoint is using SharePoint synced drive. If we look at this example, it's going to this folder called OneDrive report, and within that a folder called Report Runner, Org Ltd reports, etc. If I look at this in File Explorer, you can see it's here under my OneDrive. So this folder is synced directly through to SharePoint. So I don't actually need to upload to SharePoint. It is using OneDrive in SharePoint's functionality. So if I look at these reports in here, open my SharePoint site. So I'm going to my SharePoint site, which is this Sage 300 doc. And within that, I have this library and this folder. So this is where I'm saving my reports. Org Ltd and FR National. Got these new reports here. Department 100, Department 200, updated just now. So they correspond to these reports in here. So I haven't had to manually upload them to SharePoint, and I haven't had to configure any SharePoint details in the Report Runner. It is using OneDrive's and SharePoint sync features. So we have documented the steps for this in a knowledge base article. Final question on this is, can I have different users with different groups of reports? The answer is not with Financial Report Runner. With Financial Report Runner, you configure the security in Admin Services, the security group. Let's find Information Manager. And if we look at the options here, we have the one that applies to Financial Report Runner. There's only one, it's Financial Report Runner. So either I have access to Financial Report Runner and I can view all reports, or I don't have access to Financial Report Runner. All the Report Runner security groups apply to Crystal reports run using Crystal Report Runner. Okay, so we've looked at running a report for a division one by one, refreshing and renaming and emailing groups of reports, saving settings for a group of reports, selecting fiscal year and period, having multiple FR specs in the same workbook, and look at security on financial reports. We've looked at using Sync Drive to upload reports directly into SharePoint as well. Note that you can also sync drives with Google Drive and Dropbox. The next part of the presentation, we're going to look at using Process Scheduler Level 3 to refresh reports. And that lets you distribute your reports unattended. To configure Process Scheduler Level 3, it's all around the report group. So in our example, we had Division 100 and Division 200, which group several FR specs. And as we can do manually, you can choose to email the reports and where you're going to save the reports and what you're going to call them when you save them. You set the fiscal year and period relative to the time that it is being run, because in most cases, you will run Process Scheduler unattended through Windows Task Scheduler. So we don't know, you can't choose a particular fiscal year and period. We only know now, which is the run date when you're actually running the schedule, and we calculate the fiscal year and the fiscal period based on now. So you can do current year or previous year or next year, or particularly for budget, and the same with the fiscal period. One of the big benefits of Report Runner is you can run these groups of reports across multiple companies without having to log into each company one at a time to run your financial reports. Finally, we typically schedule this through Windows Task Scheduler. And again, we will not look at the detailed steps of configuring Process Scheduler. This is all documented in the videos on setting up Process Scheduler in general. We will focus on what is relevant to a Financial Report Runner. A reminder that you need to do a Sage 300 workstation setup and have Excel installed on the machine where the schedule is run in Windows Task Scheduler. So let's keep our report groups here because that's what we're going to be using in Process Scheduler. So just briefly, the key steps are to configure Process Scheduler, which one is your main company, and your email. Then you would configure how to log in to all the companies where you want to run a report, including yourself. So we've configured this in here. And then you set up an email message if required. And then it all happens in this schedule menu here. So I have already set up a schedule to run the financial reports. Said that I'm only going to email if there is an error. And let's look at the detail. It's a bit easier to see what's going on. I have chosen this action called Run Financial Report Group, which is Process Scheduler Level 3. And let's bring this one back here. I choose which company I want to use, Orc Ltd. And then I can choose my report group. So you can see I've got two report groups configured, 100 and 200. Then I can choose which fiscal year to run relative to when it's going to be run. And then same with the fiscal period. So in this scenario, we're assuming we're running at the beginning of the month all the reports for the prior month. Give an email subject, choose who to email, and then again I'm going to save in this folder, and I have access to very similar naming convention. And one is the name, which is the description that I'm seeing here, Department 100-balance sheet, Department 100-financial ratios. And then the fiscal year and previous fiscal period, because that's what I've configured in my parameters. Then once Department 100 is successful, I can go and run step 5, which is the next one, which is doing the same thing but for Department 200. So one of the differences between what we're seeing here in Process Scheduler and what we saw here in my saved run. My saved run, I can also group Department 100 and 200, but they were all going to the same folder and to the same email. When I do it through Process Scheduler, I can have a different email and a different folder for the different report group. So it gives me more flexibility to refresh reports, name them differently, and send them to different people, all with one click. So once I've done that, you can click Run, and it's going to do what we've done before, which is refresh the reports and email. So when you run Process Scheduler, in many cases, you would then configure Windows Task Scheduler to actually run the schedule called Run Financial Reports, and you would do this if you want to run this unattended after business hours, so that you come in the morning and you've got your reports run for you. This is very common with crystal reports, like sales analysis type of reports. With financial reports, often people don't know exactly when the month end is going to be finished. They quite often manually click Run in the schedule in here. But both options are available. And as I mentioned before, you can connect through multiple companies. So if you want to run your set of financial reports across Orc Ltd and Orc IN2 and Orc IN3, you can do this with just one click from Process Scheduler. So this is a really big time saver when you have multiple companies. Let's move on to some tips for Financial Report Runner. And the first one is where to save your FR specs. Can I use the GL-XXA ENG folder, so GL70A folder for 2023? Yes, you can. But that means that after an upgrade, you may not have your GL70A ENG folder, so you would then need to change the path where the specs are and change them to the GL71A ENG folder, which you can do manually in Financial Report Writer, but if you have many reports, it may be a little bit tedious. So we have given you an example in the knowledge base on how to update through SQL a whole lot of reports in the EBFR table. So generally, we would suggest as a best practice that you use customization directory for your FR specs, as we have seen in the demo. A few common support questions with the Report Runner, and they typically refer to Excel issues, as Financial Report Runner actually runs Excel programmatically and runs Excel with the financial reports. Obviously, the first thing you have to check is that the financial report and the statement designer actually work on the machine where you're running Financial Report Runner. Can you export the Financial Report Runner configuration? Yes, you can, but it's only one at a time. So if I go here, I can go File, Export, and it's going to select this Department 100 balance sheet, which creates this FRE file. You can open it in Notepad and change, the description or change something in it, and then re-import it using File Import, but it's one at a time. It's not often used. It is generally easier if you need to add another report. So we mentioned that a lot of the support questions relate to Excel. Sometimes after a Microsoft Office update or Windows update, you get an application object error when running financial report. Unfortunately, the only solution for that is to do a quick repair of Office, and the exact steps are documented in this knowledge base article. We won't go through that now. The Excel compatibility message relates to saving some Excel 2019 or current Excel formats, so the extension XLSX, into XLS format, which is the format that is currently supported by a Report Runner object. If you get this message, the first thing is to do the compatibility check and fix of your actual financial report specs. If you still have it, maybe send it to us, support at orchid.systems, and we will help you with that. We mentioned that you can have FR specs that have multiple sheets in a single report, and Financial Report Runner will open the first sheet, refresh it, open the next sheet, refresh it. If you have a blank sheet in a report, you will get an error message called Select Method of Range Class Failed. And that is because the blank sheet, Report Runner tries to refresh a blank sheet, doesn't find any FR specs, and returns that error. So the solution for that is to delete the blank sheet in your report. We've looked at how to run the GL financial report through Financial Report Writer to automate running department by department, division, region, province, national, how to refresh and rename groups of reports, how to select the fiscal year and period, how to use SharePoint Sync Drive to save reports directly in SharePoint, how to have FR specs with multiple sheets, use Process Scheduler Level 3 to refresh and email the reports, as well as some common support questions. A lot of that information is available in the Report Runner help, which you can access from the Orchid website, Resources Online Help. Find the module, and here's Report Runner. And on the Report Runner help, we have direct links to the training and user guides, as well as a couple of videos, one for Report Runner training and one for the Financial Report Runner training, plus some common topics to get started. Let's now focus on Crystal Reports Report Runner. We've presented how to add sections and Crystal reports, including configuring the parameters, in many webinars in the past, including in the training videos. The resources are available on the Orchid website, and the easiest way to find them is to go to the Orchid website, Sage 300 add-ons, Report Runner page, and towards the bottom we have our Learn More section with relevant videos, a detailed demo focusing on Crystal reports, Report Runner and Process Scheduler and data views, as well as the detailed Report Runner training video. So today we will focus on some tips for less standard reports and answer some common support questions. Some of what we have looked at earlier for Financial Report Runner is also relevant for Crystal reports, for example, emailing with Microsoft Graph, as well as using SharePoint Sync functionality to save reports to SharePoint. For Crystal Report Runner, we will look at security and how we set up different reports for different users, using dates, fiscal year and period in the parameters, running a data pipe report, looking at the example of the GL transaction listing report, which is relevant particularly for people who run a lot of financial reports. We will then discuss a few special reports like AP/AR aging reports and AR statements, as well as look more closely at how to refresh reports with Process Scheduler Level 1 and some common support questions. Let's start with security in Report Runner. How do I configure Report Runner so that different users see different reports? We use the traditional Sage 300 security groups for Information Manager. Then we assign our users to the groups and we link a report to a group. So as I'm adding my reports to Report Runner, my Crystal reports to Report Runner, I can say which security group that report belongs to. And we'll log in as Susan to view different reports. So let's now log into Sage 300. To set up security, we have to create some groups for Report Runner Information Manager. So I've got a group here that has access to all report groups, and as you can see, we've got groups A to Z, so 26 different security groups. I've created a second group where the user only has access to reports in security group B, as well as reports that don't have any security attached to them. And then I have configured Susan to be part of that RR no GL group. So now what I need to do in Report Runner, Analytical Reports, Report Runner, is decide which reports belong to which group. So I'm going to check this one, my GL transaction listing report, and it's part of security group A. I can select here which security group that report belongs to. And then let's look at our sales reports. They're all part of security group C. And then if I look at my AP reports, you'll find that they don't have a security group. So now if I log on to Sage 300 as Susan and go to Report Runner, you can see that I don't have any GL report groups and I don't have any OE report groups. I only have access to these groups, to these reports that weren't allocated to any security groups. So I can change this and say actually this report should be security group B as well. So I'm going to save that. If I log back as Susan, I have one sales report available. Admin can see there's 3 reports in there, but Susan can only see 1 report. Let's now have a look at dates and fiscal year, fiscal period in Crystal reports. We can, if the report has a fiscal year or fiscal period parameter, we can add this as a parameter where you can select your fiscal year and period when you run the report through Crystal Reports. If the report has a date parameter, we can add a date picker and we can set some default values. But a very common question is, what about dynamically picking up the date? For example, when you're running from process schedulers and you can't pass a parameter to a report, all process scheduler knows is that we're running the report today. In such cases, the report itself needs to select the records dynamically based on the run date. If you need this sort of things as you're configuring report runner, you need to look at the reports that you're running and you may need to amend the reports. Basically, you have a formula that is dependent on today's date in Crystal. So we won't look at doing that. This is more advanced Crystal reporting tips, but pointing you in that direction, and we can help you with a specific example if you need to. So in this example, we're going to look at our GL transaction listing, and we will look more closely at how to add it to Report Runner in the next part of the presentation. You can see when I'm running this report, it's prompting me from fiscal year and from fiscal period, as well as a to fiscal period and fiscal year. And the fiscal year is defaulting to today's year. How have we achieved that? If I edit this report, I can see here I've got a from fiscal parameter in my report, and when I try and edit this report, I've set the input type to fiscal year. This is part of what Report Runner gives you. I can set an initial value, either hard coding, or like I have done for my to fiscal year, I could set this one to YYYY. If I save this, now run this report again, you can see my from fiscal year is 2023, and so is my to fiscal year. This works well if you have a fiscal year that is a calendar year. If not, you need to build the formula into your Crystal report to match today's to your fiscal calendar. In a similar example, in my AP batch control report, I've actually got a date parameter. And the way I've configured this parameter is to use date picker as the input type, and I'm setting the initial value to today. You can see it's defaulting to today, 2nd of April, and obviously I can then change the date as required. So let's look at some less common reports, and the first one is, can we run a GL transaction listing report? So yes, we can. It is a data pipe report, so it requires a bit of different configuration, which is documented in this knowledge base article. And basically you need to make sure that your EBXXA, so 70A for 2023, rpt.ini file includes the data pipe query that you can get from the standard GL report. The GL transaction listing has got many parameters, so we're suggesting that you record an AVB macro with options that you want to know exactly which parameters you want to pass to the report. Similarly, can I run the IC posting journal, which is also a data pipe report? Yes, same thing. You need to update your EB rpt.ini file, and we're documenting the steps in here. Can we run an AP and AR aging report? These one are a little bit different in that they require a temporary table in Sage 300. The standard Sage 300 screen populates a temporary table before running this report. Such reports cannot be run directly in Report Runner. For AP and AR aging, we are including as part of Report Runner some reports that redo the aging without using the temporary table. For other reports that use a temporary table, you have two options. One is to rewrite the report yourself without the temporary table, if that's possible, or use Extender in a custom script instead of Report Runner to process the data to the temp table and then refresh the report. And we have done this for various clients, for example, for the Pacific Tech Audit Logger report and for the Funds Availability report. A question that we get very often is, can we run AR statements and email customers with Report Runner? No, we can't, because one, the AR statement has populates a temporary table, and more importantly, Report Runner is not designed to set an email dynamically. So I would have to set up the report and hard code the address. So set the parameter to customer 1 going to customer 1. So it's not really a scalable solution. So let's now have a look in Sage 300 as to how we configure our data pipe GL transaction listing report. Remember, we have the steps here in the knowledge base article, but I'm going to go straight into Sage 300, Report Runner, and look at this. So I have added my report like normal from the GL PLTS1 report. It has been copied into the EB7A folder, and I have all these parameters. So to configure these parameters, I have used a macro to make sure that I'm setting up the right report. And then one more thing I have had to do is in my EB70A for 2023 report in my rpt.ini file, if I open this in Notepad++, and it was the last report that I added, so it is right at the bottom of the report. You can see here that it says type equals data pipe path, and the data pipe query. And I have copied this straight from the GL rpt.ini file in my GL folder. Let's now print this report. I can select my fiscal year and period. I'm going to choose 2020 as the start because I have better record in that sample data. There is my report. And like other functionality of Crystal Report Runner, I can choose schedule to run this report wherever I want, save it somewhere in my saved report folder, and I can optionally send an email and run from here. It will save the report PDF'd to this folder. Next question is, how can I refresh reports with Process Scheduler Level 1? I choose the action called Run Information Manager Report, which is Level 1. Select the company that I'm going to be running the report in, and that is all. Process Scheduler for Crystal reports, you cannot select the group of reports that you're running. Process Scheduler will refresh all the reports that have been selected as scheduled and where the next run date is in the past. So if I'm scheduling something to run daily, Process Scheduler will find this report, refresh it, and save it in the folder, email it if I've configured to email it, and then update the next run date to tomorrow. Tomorrow, when I run the schedule again, it will see that this report needs to be scheduled again because the next run date was in the past. This is different from Financial Report Runner, where you can select a particular report group. And as a result, when you set up the scheduling in Report Runner, you need to be careful as to what you select in there, because this is what is going to be used in the process scheduler. As previously, you can then schedule this with Windows Task Scheduler to run the Oz Process Scheduler exe for this particular schedule, and this is particularly useful if you want to run it after hours, if some of your long sales history report take a little while to run. So in Report Runner, you can see here that you've got next run date for some of the reports. For this one and this one. So if I look at this, I can go look at schedule, and you can see that it's been scheduled to run. This one is running monthly, and it's saving the report to this folder. It's not sending an email. If I look at this one, it has been configured to run daily, saving the report in there, and again, it is not sending an email in this particular case. So let's now look at this in Process Scheduler. As before, I need to configure my credentials under Options and Companies. And I have already set up the schedule, which is Run Reports. And you can see it is running all the scheduled reports in two companies, Orc Ltd and Orc IN2. So if I now run this process, you will see that it's going to save the reports into the configured folder, those two reports. The schedule has run successfully. It has found a report scheduled to run in the past. It's running it. And then if I keep going, it is found the order sales history, which is scheduled to run, and it has run it. So now let's look in the folder where I'm saving these reports, which is Orc Ltd saved report runner. And it has now saved those two reports. Let's now look at Report Runner. We can see that now the next run date for this report is tomorrow. And for that report, which was scheduled to run once a month, it's next month. In the final part of this presentation, we're going to look at a few common support questions for Crystal Report Runner. Can you export the Report Runner configuration? Yes, as previously with Financial Report Runner, but it's only one at a time, so it is not used very often. What order are the Crystal reports run in? They actually run in the order that they're added to the tree. You can't control the order in which they run, so if the order really matters, it may mean that you have to delete one and add it in another order. Parameters is an important part of what Report Runner is used for, because you can set your parameters and run the same reports with different parameters automatically. Sometimes your Crystal Report parameter prompt pops up. In most cases, this is because the customization directory in Report Runner and in Sage Admin Services is different. So if this pops up for you, you need to check that they are the same. While we're talking about parameters, reminder that if you are creating your own Crystal reports and you're adding parameters, you need to make sure that they're all set as string. So if you're trying to set up a value as a parameter, a number, you still need to set your parameter as a string and then convert it in your report. The parameter names need to be all in uppercase and cannot contain a space. And this is documented in the Report Runner help. The database. Common question is, can you run reports that include non-Sage 300 databases? For example, if you have a custom view in the Crystal report or a CRM database. Yes, it is possible, but because Report Runner calls the Sage 300 report object, you need to make sure that the first table in your select statement is a table in the Sage 300 data dictionary, and we very often use the CSCOM table for this purpose. And again, I would encourage you to look at the report runner help for in knowledge base for examples on how to do this. Sometimes Report Runner prompts you to log into the Sage 300 database. Generally, this is linked to how you have configured your custom crystal report, and you need to make sure that the DSN default properties are set to false in the database location. One way to test that the report can run successfully in Report Runner is to add the report to the Sage desktop and make sure that Sage actually updates the path to the database. Again, we will not show you how to do that. There are detailed steps in the knowledge base on these common support questions. Finally, what do we need to do after an upgrade? Obviously, we need to install and activate the latest version of Information Manager. And then, because the reports are saved in a folder called EBXXA, so EB7A for version 2023, EB69A, ENG for version 2022, you need to either rename your folder in your customization directory or copy the reports to a new folder called EB, followed by the two numbers for the version that you are upgrading to. And generally, that is all you need to do. If you are using Process Scheduler, there are also some tips to upgrade Process Scheduler, and primarily it is after activating Process Scheduler to resave the user details in Process Scheduler Options and Process Scheduler Companies. And if you are using Windows Task Scheduler, you also need to change the path to your the program that is run by Windows Task Scheduler, because it's now being picked up from the new OZ folder. In conclusion, we've looked at some report runner resources, videos, online help, and knowledge base articles, discussed some new features to email using Microsoft Graph, shared some financial report tips with some detailed setup examples, looking at refreshing with Process Scheduler Level 3 and some common support questions. Similarly, with Crystal Report Runner, we've looked at some setup examples with security, date, parameters, data pipe, refreshing with Process Scheduler Level 1, and some common support questions. Thank you for your time.